One of those first meetings may be particularly awkward, as the judicial system of Spain seems poised to indict a bunch of American officials. Nice to meet you, Prime Minister Zapatero. How's it going with the plan to arrest Alberto Gonzalez? Yeah, former Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez is one of 6 Bush administration officials that a Spanish court is moving toward prosecuting for allegedly violating international law when they created legal justifications for torture. In addition to Gonzalez, the complaint names former Justice Department lawyer John Yoo, John Yoo's former boss at the Justice Department, Jay Bybee, who remarkably is now a high-ranking federal judge. Also, Dick Cheney's former Chief of Staff, David Addington, former Undersecretary of Defense, Doug Feith, who was famously described by General Tommy Franks as, quote, the effing stupidest guy on the planet, and former Pentagon General Counsel William Haines. Now, Spain has decided to go ahead and seek these prosecutions because they are one of 145 countries who've signed on to the 1984 Convention Against Torture. What countries signed up for when they signed that treaty was the responsibility, the obligation to investigate torture cases, especially when one of their own citizens was allegedly abused. That is an obligation that Spain is taking very seriously. The Spanish judge who is moving this case forward is the same judge who got the former dictator Augusto Pinochet arrested in 1998 while he was on a trip to London. Now, Spanish lawyers say arrest warrants in this current case involving American officials could be issued within weeks, maybe even within days. What's the likelihood that our little American gang of 6 will actually stand trial in Spain? Well, according to the New York Times, quote, it's a near certainty that the warrants would not lead to arrests if the officials did not leave the United States. If the officials did not leave the United States. First of all, is it okay to be an American federal judge if you get indicted in another country? And second of all, more importantly, why is it Spain who's doing this? Why aren't we doing this? We signed that same treaty about torture. Why do we need to outsource justice to other countries? One possible hope for us cleaning up our own mess is the Obama administration's decision to nominate Don Johnsen to head up the Office of Legal Counsel, the very office that gave the Bush White House the green light for their adventure into the land of enhanced interrogation techniques. Now, the Justice Department and the Office of Legal Counsel under George W. Bush argued that they had discovered some mystical, heretofore invisible legal power that would allow the president to order violations of the Geneva Conventions with total impunity. When it came to torture specifically, they said all the accepted definitions of torture were no longer accepted, and they had a new definition. And their new definition was so narrow that in essence, you could torture people left, right, and center without ever having to call it capital T, go to court torture. Now, responding to the capital T, go to court torture redefinition memos, President Obama's pick to head up the Office of Legal Counsel, Don Johnsen, she said this, quote, where is the outrage, the public outcry, the shockingly flawed content of this memo, the deficient processes that led to its issuance, the horrific acts it encouraged, all demand our outrage. We must regain our ability to feel outrage whenever our government acts lawlessly. Wow. What a difference an administration makes. Imagine having the where is the outrage person in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel instead of the guys she was so outraged at. So why hasn't Don Johnsen been confirmed yet? Well, because Senate Republicans are holding up a vote on her nomination. Columbia University law professor and reporter Scott Horton reports on the Daily Beast that, quote, the real reason for Republicans' vehement opposition is that Johnsen is committed to overturning the Bush administration's policies on torture. She is committed to shining a light on some of the darkest skeletons of the Bush years. In other words, advocating that the U.S. should do what Spain is now starting to do for us. The Washington Post this weekend also picks up perhaps the most sickening storyline of this whole moral and constitutional and humanitarian mess. They front-paged a story in which former senior government officials say the first prisoner we tortured after 9/11, the man used by President Bush and others as an example of why it was so important to be able to torture people, not only is not and was not a member of al-Qaeda, but the information wrung out of him through torture was useless, false confessions. Quote, the harsh interrogation methods succeeded in breaking him, and the stories he told of al-Qaeda terrorism plots sent CIA officers around the globe chasing leads. In the end, though, not a single significant plot was foiled as a result of Abu Zubaida's torture confessions. Abu Zubaida's revelations triggered a series of alerts and sent hundreds of CIA and FBI investigators scurrying in pursuit of phantoms. Quote, we spent millions of dollars chasing false alarms, said one former intelligence official. Echoing reporting in Ron Suskind's 2006 book, The 1% Doctrine, these allegations raised the disgusting possibility that senior Bush administration officials knew that torture wasn't working, that it was producing false confessions and wild goose chases, but they pursued it and defended it anyway.
Washington University law professor and constitutional law expert. John, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
Vice President Cheney criticized Obama as recently as 2 weeks ago when he claimed Americans are now less safe because of the new administration's new policies on national security. And here we have officials who witnessed the old policies in action, saying they were not only completely ineffective, but they turned a fairly cooperative detainee into a guy who just said anything to stop the pain. Is this the moment at which we have jumped from a theory that torture does not work on any moral or practical level to a fact that torture does not work on any moral or practical level?
Well, that's, of course, the great irony about torture, is that it's long been known to produce absolute garbage. We had hoped that the moral limitations would be enough to prevent the United States government from starting a torture program. But history has shown that it has very little practical benefit. And the terrible thing is how cheaply the Bush administration sold our collective soul on this issue, how little we got for it. It's the ultimate Faustian bargain. The appearance that is left is that there were people in the White House on a visceral level wanted to have rough techniques exercised against these people. And it seemed to almost have the technique being the main driving force, that they wanted to see it used as opposed to its purpose. The great irony as well is that we've seen how legitimate means produce legitimate information. Part of the value of being in a legal system is it forces people to focus on the facts, what they know, and to get information that's reliable and usable, instead of the garbage produced here at such a just prohibitive cost for this country. The only thing we got out of this was the condemnation of the ages. We got nothing else.
Have we seen any movement yet out of the Holder Justice Department or any other part of the Obama administration about doing something about Bush administration abuses of power like torture?
No. I think that the White House is still desperately hoping that people will forget about this. President Obama has clearly been told by his political advisors that this would not be good for him and not be good for his administration. But of course, this isn't supposed to be a discretionary act. We're bound to do this. Now, the Spanish inquiry creates a very interesting prospect for Obama. That is, he can take the high road finally, right now, by saying that we prefer to do our own investigation. It's not my choice. I'll have a special prosecutor in the United States look into these, not to a foreign tribunal. He can do that and take the high ground, and he can regain what we've lost. But if he doesn't, that he will be blocking not just an investigation in the United States of known war crimes, but he'll be blocking an international effort to look into the same acts.
The Cheney national security aide who suggested this afternoon that the Cy Hirsch account of an executive assassination ring that reported to the vice president's office, it's not true. Then he described what was true, and of course it describes exactly that, only with a different name to it. Should the Spanish prosecutors be taking notes, because they don't include Cheney in their investigation here? They're focusing on 6 other figures.
Well, I think so, but you know, Dick Cheney is every criminal defense attorney's nightmare. I mean, he's going around virtually selling torture like it's a sham product. And, you know, this is very embarrassing for Obama, because the reason he's out there, the reason he's having these conversations, is because Obama's protecting him from a criminal charge, from a criminal investigation. He wouldn't be doing this if Obama simply said, look, what you are describing is a crime. Now, you can keep on talking about it, you can incriminate yourself, but I'm not going to protect you. I'm going to leave it to a professional prosecutor to determine whether what you're saying so proudly happens to be a criminal act.
You're an expert on the U.S. Constitution. I don't know. We've never discussed what you know about the Spanish government, but do you have any idea why on earth? I mean, even this Spanish magistrate who's doing this in Spain seems to be pulling his punches and not going after the former vice president and the former president of this country. You got any idea why?
Well, lawyers transcend boundaries, thank God. But one of the reasons, maybe you can always charge the higher-ups. You tend to go for lower-lying fruit, although these are fairly high-up individuals, but you tend to go for the first line of defendants, and then if you have a case, you go for the higher ones. But there's another reason. It's well known the Obama administration is protecting President Bush and Vice President Cheney from criminal investigation. And if he went after the two of them, the U.S. government could move aggressively to shut down the inquiry.